When I saw my husband scrolling through my phone, my heart skipped a beat, not out of fear that he'd catch me in a lie, but because he would see those messages. The ones I had meant to delete but forgot. I lunged to grab it from his hands, but he pulled back swiftly, still reading. I watched his face shift with every line, watched it transform with realization, anger, confusion. In that moment, I felt my life unraveling in seconds. Yes, he was about to learn the truth, but not the whole truth. His fingers trembled as he scrolled, and I knew exactly which message was coming next. The one that would not only shatter everything but twist the blade. Or maybe it would only raise more questions. Then, suddenly, my phone vibrated in his hands. A new notification lit up the screen. I saw the name of the sender flash across, and his face went pale. He froze. Didn't blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, a habit I'd had since I was a child whenever I felt cornered. My nerves spiraled, mixing with a raw terror I hadn't felt in years. His breathing grew louder, faster. I could hear it even across the 2 meters of silence between us. This was the moment I had feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a choice, a mistake, that would change everything. And now, I had no idea how to fix it. But let me tell you how it really happened. Before I share the secret I've been burying for far too long, tell me in the comments what city you're watching this from, and have you ever had a secret you tried desperately to hide, only to watch it unravel anyway? There are moments when a woman realizes her life has gone quiet, not in the peaceful sense, but the kind of silence that hums like static. My mornings used to begin with my daughter's footsteps thudding down the stairs, my husband's muffled voice from his home office, the sound of keys and coffee cups and schedules. Now, they begin with the ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the fridge. My daughter is grown, and though she still lives under our roof, she has carved a world I'm no longer invited into. My husband and I sleep in the same bed, yet we exist in different rooms emotionally. I remember standing by the window last Monday, watching her step into a car I didn't recognize. She didn't kiss me goodbye or say when she'd be back. Just a fleeting glance, a flick of her hair, and the slam of a door. I stood there long after the car disappeared, coffee cooling in my hand. Something inside me felt heavy, not worry, not suspicion, just distance. The kind of distance you can't measure in miles. Later that evening, I made salmon for dinner. I even added a lemon glaze the way he used to like it. He didn't comment on it. He barely looked up from his screen. "Thanks," he mumbled. I watched him eat in silence, my fork untouched. The food felt foreign in my mouth. I chewed, I swallowed, but nothing registered. I noticed the way his sleeves were rolled, how his forearms looked older than I remembered. How his watch sat tighter than before. And how I couldn't recall the last time he touched me without obligation. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I reached for the soft gray sweater I always wore on Tuesdays but paused. Instead, I picked out a blouse I hadn't worn in years, satin, dark green, slightly lower at the neck. I ran my fingers across the fabric, uncertain. When I caught my reflection, I tilted my chin and applied a shade of lipstick I used to save for dinner parties. It wasn't for him. It wasn't for anyone. I just wanted to remember who I used to be before I became invisible in my own home. It was after that I signed up for the gym. I told them it was about health, that my doctor had mentioned cholesterol and cardio. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. I wanted a place that wasn't my kitchen, my laundry room, my hallway of silence. I wanted to be somewhere with movement, with voices, with people who didn't know what I had become. I met him on my second visit. He wasn't what I expected, not loud or pushy like most trainers I imagined. He had a stillness about him, the kind that made you notice your own breathing. "You're new," he said. Not as a question, just a quiet observation. I nodded, slightly out of breath from a treadmill I couldn't quite master. He offered me a towel and gestured toward the stretching mats. Try here next time. It's easier on the joints. I thanked him, and we didn't speak again that day. But the way he looked at me lingered. It wasn't flirtatious. It was present. As if he saw me, not the version I wore for my family, but something beneath. I told myself it meant nothing. I went home and scrubbed the bathroom tiles until my knuckles ached. The days bled into each other. My daughter left earlier. Came home later. Sometimes not at all. My husband's meetings stretched past bedtime. I watched a show alone on the couch, laughed once, then realized no one was there to hear it. I laughed again, louder, just to break the quiet. A week later, I caught my daughter whispering on the phone, turned away from me, her voice sharp and hurried. She flinched when she noticed me. "Don't you knock," she snapped, even though the door was open. I didn't respond. Just stood there, watching her chest rise and fall, the panic in her eyes. She was in love, or something close to it. I could feel it radiating off her like heat. That night, I dreamed of a hotel room I didn't recognize, of dim lights and someone's hands brushing mine across a table. I woke with my heart pounding and an ache I couldn't name. The following afternoon, I returned to the gym. The satin blouse was back in the closet, replaced by a fitted zip-up I hadn't dared wear in public before. He saw me from across the floor and gave a nod. No words. Just a glance that said, "You came back." Something shifted in me then. Not because I wanted him. Not yet. But because I needed someone to look at me like I was still here. Later, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, I heard my husband on the phone. "Yeah, she's been going out more. Jim, she says." He paused. "No, I don't think it's that." Another pause. Then a laugh. "Even if it were, good for her. Good for her." I stared at the basket of socks and felt something tighten in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was anger or sadness or a strange combination of both. I had given decades to this man. Raised a child. Built a life. And now, my invisibility was a punchline. I opened the drawer beside the bed and pulled out a photograph from years ago, me in a summer dress, smiling, wind in my hair, his arm around my waist. I didn't recognize myself. Not really. By the time my daughter came home, I was already in bed. She peeked into my room, said nothing, then closed the door gently. I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about all the things I had never said. That was the first night I realized I was lonely. Not just alone. There's a difference. One is a state. The other is a sentence. And I had been serving mine in silence for far too long. The second time I saw him, I almost turned around and left. I told myself it was because I'd forgotten my water bottle, or that I hadn't slept well, or that the ache in my shoulders wasn't worth pushing through. But the truth was simpler, quieter, and harder to admit. I was afraid of being seen again. He was already there, standing near the row of mats, helping someone adjust their posture. I watched the way his hands moved, the calm focus in his face, the way he nodded when the client got it right. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But there was something about the way he occupied space that unsettled me. Because I could feel myself drawn to it. I told myself I would do only cardio that day. Something mindless, mechanical, with no interaction. I picked a treadmill at the far end, started walking, increased the speed a little. My reflection in the glass wall across from me was unfamiliar, tight ponytail, flushed cheeks, lips pressed into a firm line. I looked determined, maybe even confident, but it was all armor. 5 minutes in, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't look, but I didn't need to. I knew it was him. You left early last time, he said, his tone low and even, almost casual. I had errands, I replied, eyes still on the console. My voice sounded thinner than I wanted. He didn't say anything right away. Just stepped onto the treadmill beside mine and started walking too. I kept my pace steady, focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Anything to drown the sound of my thoughts. Eventually, he said, most people who come here aren't consistent the first few weeks. They drift. Lose momentum. I'm not most people. That made him smile. I saw it in the corner of my eye. A small, genuine twitch of his mouth, like he was amused by something only he understood. And I hated that it made me want to smile too. We didn't talk again after that. Just walked. 30 minutes. Step after step. Until I finally stopped the machine and wiped my forehead. He finished shortly after and gestured toward the water station. I followed, telling myself it was just routine. Just hydration. Nothing more. He handed me a paper cup and said, if you want help with form or pacing, let me know. I nodded. Thanks. I should have left then. Should have walked to my car, turned on the ignition, and driven straight home. But instead, I lingered. Asked something stupid about stretching. He answered. We ended up talking for another 15 minutes, about nothing, really. Weather. Music. Injuries that happen when people rush their routines. But underneath the surface, something was moving. A current I hadn't felt in years. Not flirtation, not yet. Just attention. Presence. And maybe that was what I missed most. When I finally did leave, it was with a strange lightness in my chest, and a heavier weight in my gut. I sat in the car, staring at the steering wheel, hands gripping it too tightly. I drove home in silence again, radio off, windows up, afraid of the noise in my own head. Later that evening, while I chopped onions for dinner, my daughter came into the kitchen. She glanced at my clothes, still damp with sweat. You're really sticking to that gym thing, she said. Trying to, I replied, careful with my tone. Not bad, she muttered. Then, as she opened the fridge, I saw her glance at my phone on the counter. Just a flick of the eyes. It was quick, but not unnoticeable. I waited, half expecting her to say something else. But she didn't. She grabbed a soda and left, leaving the door ajar. Her footsteps up the stairs echoed louder than usual. I stared at the vegetables on the cutting board, blade hovering over a tomato. Something in her voice, her glance, it wasn't just casual interest. It was curiosity. Or suspicion. My phone buzzed then. Just a calendar reminder. But for a moment, my breath caught. I picked it up and dismissed the alert, then placed it face down. That night, my husband mentioned a business trip. 2 days. Maybe 3. You'll manage, he asked between bites of his reheated casserole. Of course, I said. He didn't look at me. Just sipped his wine, then opened his laptop at the table, as if that was part of the meal. I cleared the plates without a word. As I stood at the sink, hands submerged in warm soapy water, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, anticipation. Not guilt, not regret. Just the low hum of something unfinished. I went to bed early, claiming a headache. In truth, I wanted space. Darkness. Time to think. I lay there, listening to the faint sound of his keyboard downstairs. Wondering if he ever noticed how quiet I'd become. If he even cared. Or if we'd just settled into a silence neither of us knew how to break. The next morning, I dressed in something new. Not revealing. Just fitted. Clean lines. A shirt that complemented my shape, pants that made me feel defined. At the gym, he noticed. I knew he would. He said nothing. But I saw the way his eyes lingered, just a second too long. And I felt it, acknowledgement. After the session, we both ended up near the lockers. No one else around. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You look different today, he said. Do I? He nodded. Something in your eyes. I didn't respond. Just held his gaze longer than I should have. And maybe that was the moment. The real shift. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright. I reached my car, opened the door, but didn't get in. He was behind me. Not close, but not far. We stood there. Not speaking. Just standing. Then it happened. We kissed. Not impulsively. Not accidentally. But deliberately. After, I got into my car and drove away. No music. No thoughts. Just the sound of my own breath, filling the silence. The morning after didn't feel like the aftermath of something reckless. It felt strangely quiet, almost ordinary, as if my body hadn't registered the weight of what had changed. But my mind had. Every movement felt calculated. Every glance had meaning now. The way I brewed coffee, the way I stood by the window, the way I avoided mirrors, it all felt like I was playing a part in a film where I had suddenly become someone else, and yet entirely more myself than I had been in years. He didn't text. I didn't expect him to. I wasn't even sure I wanted him to. The silence between us now wasn't absence, it was a shared knowledge. Something had shifted, and no one would be the same on the other side of it. By the time my daughter walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, I had already cleaned the counters twice. She grabbed a banana, glanced at me, then at the floor. You're up early, she mumbled. So are you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't answer, just nodded and moved past me. As she reached for her bag, something fell out, her phone, screen up, still unlocked. And for a single moment, just a sliver of a second, I saw a name I didn't recognize followed by a heart emoji. Then it was gone, scooped up with more urgency than necessary. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. We were both hiding pieces of ourselves now. The thought made my stomach twist in a knot that didn't loosen even after she left. I sat down with my coffee, holding the mug in both hands like it was an anchor. A part of me wanted to erase yesterday, to pretend it was a brief lapse in judgment brought on by months of neglect and emotional drought. Another part, the quieter one, was still holding on to that moment, like a secret that kept me warm. Later that day, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I drove without a destination. Not out of boredom, not to run errands, but because I couldn't sit still. I ended up at a small shopping center I hadn't visited in ages. I walked aimlessly, drifting between aisles of things I didn't need. I picked up a candle, held it to my nose, and for a moment, the scent reminded me of a hotel room I stayed in once during a family vacation when our daughter was 10. Back when things were simple, when I still felt like someone's favorite person. I put the candle back and left without buying anything. That evening, while chopping vegetables for dinner, my husband came home earlier than usual. I heard the sound of his keys in the door, his briefcase settling against the wall, the click of his shoes on the tile. I didn't turn around. He walked into the kitchen, kissed the top of my head out of habit, then asked, "Need help?" I said no, though part of me wanted him to insist. He didn't. He walked to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and left. The distance between us was measurable now, like inches of ice between two bodies under the same roof. We ate dinner mostly in silence. He scrolled through his phone. My daughter didn't come home. At some point, I asked if she had told him anything lately. He shook his head, barely looking up. She's a teenager, he said. They lie. It's part of the process. His casual dismissal hit harder than I expected. I thought about the name on her screen, about how quickly she had grabbed her phone, how carefully she avoided my eyes lately. Something wasn't right. And yet, who was I to question her secrecy, given my own? After dinner, I sat on the couch and watched the same news program I watched every night, though I didn't absorb a single word. I kept seeing flashes in my mind, a glance, a touch, the way the sun hit the parking lot as I closed my car door yesterday. These things refused to leave me. When my husband came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. He didn't try to wake me. Just turned off the light, lay down beside me, and eventually began snoring lightly. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, tracing the cracks in the ceiling with my thoughts. The next morning, my daughter cornered me in the hallway. "I need a new car," she said flatly. I blinked, still half asleep. "What?" "The one we bought is falling apart." "You know that." "It's not safe anymore." "It still runs." "Not well." She crossed her arms. "Look, if you won't talk to Dad about it, I will." The tone in her voice was sharper than usual. There was something else there, something she wasn't saying. I hesitated, searching her face. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" I said slowly. "Because you're better at convincing him," she snapped. "He listens to you." I wasn't sure when that had last been true. She walked away before I could answer. I stood there, blinking at the empty hallway, realizing that she wasn't just asking for a favor, she was testing something. Pressuring. And for the first time, I saw myself in her. The subtle deflection. The strategic manipulation. It shook me more than I wanted to admit. That afternoon, I got another message from the gym. A routine check-in, automated. "We haven't seen you in a few days. Come move with us." I didn't respond. But I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I got in the car. I didn't pack a bag. Didn't dress for exercise. I wore the same jeans and shirt I'd cleaned the house in. But I went anyway. Not for a workout, not even for him. I needed to stand somewhere that didn't carry the weight of memories. Somewhere I could breathe. He was there, near the office desk this time, sorting towels. When he looked up and saw me, he didn't smile, didn't speak. Just nodded once. That quiet presence again. That dangerous calm. I lingered by the window for a few minutes, pretending to check my phone. Then I left. No words. No gestures. Just the knowledge that I'd been there, that he'd seen me. And that was enough, for now. When I returned home, my daughter was in the kitchen, typing furiously on her laptop. She didn't look up. But as I passed, she said, "So? What did you do today?" I paused. Just long enough for her to notice. "Groceries," I said. A lie. But not the kind that leaves a mark. Not yet. She narrowed her eyes slightly, but didn't press. That night, I took a long shower. Let the water run down my back until it turned lukewarm. I thought about the conversation with my daughter, the unspoken tension, the edge in her voice. I thought about the silence at dinner, the glance across the treadmill, the weight of my choices stacking like stones in my chest. I dried off, put on a robe, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection didn't look different. But everything inside had shifted. And I couldn't undo it now. I didn't even know if I wanted to. Somewhere deep down, I understood, this was only the beginning. I didn't go back to the gym for the next 3 days. Not because I was avoiding him, and not because of guilt, though I would have preferred either of those reasons. The truth was more fragile. I didn't know who I was becoming, and I needed to sit with that before letting it grow into something I couldn't reverse. I filled my days with routines. I cleaned surfaces that didn't need cleaning. I sorted drawers I hadn't touched in years. I washed curtains, rearranged books, scrubbed baseboards. Anything that gave the illusion of order, of control. But beneath it all, I was restless. Not from shame or regret, but from something quieter. I couldn't name it, but it followed me into every room. My husband noticed the cleaning. He complimented the lemon scent in the hallway. Asked if I'd hired someone. I shook my head. He didn't ask anything else. Just nodded, went back to his phone, his meetings, his quiet routines. We were two people orbiting the same kitchen table, barely tethered anymore. My daughter, on the other hand, was becoming more aggressive in her quiet way. She hovered when I checked my phone. She asked questions with pointed casualness, like she was testing waters. "Are you seeing someone at the gym?" she asked one night while reheating leftovers. I looked up slowly. No. It wasn't technically a lie. I hadn't seen him since. But I knew she didn't believe me. She shrugged and stirred her food, letting the silence say what she wanted to say. She knew something. Not the details, not the facts, but daughters know when their mothers change. She watched me now like I used to watch her as a child, sensing mood swings, waiting for clues. And in that shift, I saw how our roles had quietly inverted. She had power over me now, whether she realized it or not. The rail turn came on Friday. I was in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea, when I noticed the corner of a white envelope sticking out from beneath a stack of mail. I almost didn't see it. There was no address, no stamp. Just my name in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly, carefully, like it might explode. Inside was a printed photo, just one. Black and white. Grainy, but clear enough. It was me, standing next to him in the parking lot, our faces close. Not kissing, not touching. But close. Too close. No message. No signature. Just the image. I stared at it for a long time. My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. Not because I was scared of being found out, but because someone had seen me. Someone had chosen to show me that they had seen. And that changed everything. I burned the photo in the sink. Watched it curl and blacken. But the image was already seared into my mind. Whoever sent it hadn't done it for revenge. They did it to remind me, someone was watching. That night, my daughter asked again about the car. "I told you, not now," I said, keeping my voice steady. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowed. "Why not? Dad could afford it." I said no. For a moment, she looked genuinely stunned. Like she couldn't believe I was drawing a line. Then, with a sharpness I hadn't heard in her before, she said, "You know he listens to you more than me. Or maybe not anymore." I blinked. What's that supposed to mean? But she didn't answer. Just turned on her heel and left the room. I stood alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. The whole house felt like a trap then, a place where I was both the prisoner and the one who had built the walls. Later that evening, my husband made a strange comment over dinner. Out of nowhere, he said, "I've been thinking we should go away for a weekend. Just the two of us." I looked up from my plate. "What brought that on?" He shrugged. "We haven't done anything together in a while. Thought it might be nice." It sounded rehearsed. Like he was testing me, watching for a reaction. I managed a nod. "Sure. Let's talk about it." But we didn't. He didn't bring it up again. The next day, I returned to the gym. This time, I wore the same neutral workout clothes I always had. No makeup. No perfume. No hidden message. When I walked in, he was behind the desk, typing something on the computer. He glanced up, saw me, and paused. "Back again," he said. I nodded. "Just here to exercise." He didn't smile. Didn't flirt. Just nodded back. "I'll be around if you need help." I worked out quietly, methodically. Kept my eyes forward. Focused on the repetition of movement. One foot in front of the other. One lift at a time. As if the rhythm could erase the noise inside my head. When I left, we didn't speak. But as I reached my car, I noticed something under the windshield wiper. A single folded note. I looked around. No one was nearby. I opened it. 2 words, "Be careful." My breath caught. It wasn't signed. The handwriting was different from the first envelope. Sharper. Less controlled. Whoever this was, it wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was a warning. I drove home slowly, every intersection stretching into an eternity. My thoughts spiraled. Was it him? Was it someone else at the gym? A neighbor? My daughter? Back home, the house felt colder. Empty, though I wasn't alone. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the note for a long time before finally tearing it into tiny pieces and flushing them down the sink. Whatever this was, whatever I had stepped into, wasn't just about me anymore. It was bleeding into everything. Into my daughter's suspicions. Into my husband's sudden attentiveness. Into the air around me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when exactly I stopped being the version of myself I used to know. It wasn't one moment. It wasn't the kiss. It wasn't the note. It was 1,000 small choices that led me here. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that there was no going back now. The next few days passed like a balancing act between stillness and tension. Everything I did felt slightly offbeat, like I was walking a line that had grown thinner and less forgiving. Even mundane tasks had weight. Folding laundry, driving to the store, stirring sauce on the stove, each action felt deliberate, cautious, as if I were trying to convince the world, or myself, that everything was exactly as it had always been. But it wasn't. There was a photo once, years ago, from a trip we took as a family to the coast. In it, I was mid-laugh, salt wind in my hair, my daughter's hand on my arm. My husband had caught the moment unexpectedly. The spontaneity of it, the color, the brightness, yet haunted me lately. Not because I missed that version of myself, but because I had no idea when she disappeared. When the light began to dim. When I started living like I owed someone proof that I was fine. By Thursday, I hadn't told anyone about the note. I told myself it was nothing. A prank. A bored teenager. A coincidence. I told myself a lot of things. But I changed my gym schedule. Instead of going mid-morning, I went later, near closing time. Fewer people. Less noise. Fewer eyes. He was there, as always. He greeted me the same way he always had, with that quiet presence that now made my chest tighten slightly. There were no smiles. No private looks. If someone watched us, they would see nothing unusual. Just a trainer and a client, exchanging a brief nod, a courteous distance. A silence that had once felt comforting now stretched between us like thread pulled too tight. I moved through the machines mechanically, watching my form, counting my repetitions, timing my rests. He never approached, never hovered. I wondered if he had received a note too. Or if he sensed the shift. Maybe he had sensed it before I did. When I finished, I lingered for a moment near the water station. He passed me a towel, his hand brushing mine. Nothing more. We didn't speak. But outside, under the dusky sky and parking lot lights, we stood by my car. Not close. Not far. That strange space between intimacy and restraint. We kissed. And then I left. The drive home felt longer than usual. I didn't take the most direct route. I let the turns lead me aimlessly, needing the motion. Needing to feel the road under me, the hum of the engine, something real. The quiet inside the car wasn't empty, it was thick with the aftermath of something I couldn't name. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was off. A small, petty signal from my husband. He never turned it off before I came home, not once in all the years we'd lived here. But tonight, it was dark. Inside, he was watching television with the volume low, a beer resting on the arm of the chair, his glasses slipping halfway down his nose. He didn't look up as I entered. "You're late," he said. I stopped for groceries. A lie. A soft one. One he didn't challenge. He didn't ask where the groceries were. He just nodded and turned back to the screen. I stood there for a few moments, the bag I brought with me still in my hand, gym clothes, water bottle, a damp towel. Then I walked past him and up the stairs, each step pressing louder in the quiet. In the bathroom, I ran the tap and washed my face slowly. My eyes were red, not from crying, but from something deeper, exhaustion, perhaps. Or erosion. A slow wearing down of everything I thought I understood. When I looked up into the mirror, I didn't flinch. I just stared. I traced the lines by my mouth, the faint crease between my eyebrows, the softness under my jaw. I didn't hate what I saw. But I didn't quite recognize it either. Down the hall, I heard my daughter talking on the phone. Laughing softly. She still had that sound, the unfiltered laugh of someone who hadn't yet learned to hide. I used to have it too. The next morning, she caught me near the stairs. "Can we talk?" she asked, arms folded, trying to sound casual. "About what?" "The car. And maybe, other things." I waited. She hesitated, then added, "I know you're not telling Dad everything." It wasn't an accusation. Not quite. More like a test balloon, floated gently to see how I would respond. "What makes you think that?" I asked. She shrugged. "You've changed." I studied her face, suddenly seeing all the versions of her I had raised, toddler, child, teenager, layered on top of the woman she was becoming. It hit me then how little we really knew about each other anymore. "We all change," I said softly. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave mine. "Do I still matter to you?" she asked. The question pierced something in me I didn't know was still vulnerable. "Of course," I said, too quickly. She didn't smile. Just turned and walked into the kitchen. Later that day, I found an old notebook tucked between cookbooks in the pantry. One of those journals I used to write in before life became a series of responsibilities. I flipped through it, lists, sketches, half-finished thoughts. A reminder that I once had space to process things, to express, to reflect. I wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page: "This is not about escape. This is about waking up." I didn't write anything else. The days blurred after that. My husband kept his distance. My daughter watched me with quiet curiosity. The house felt less like a home and more like a hallway I was passing through. But something had solidified in me. A choice. Not a plan. Not yet. But a choice to stop shrinking. I went back to the gym the following week. No special outfit. No makeup. No hope for anything in return. Just me. A woman in motion. He was there. He looked at me as I entered. Nothing in his face gave anything away. And I realized, in that moment, that whatever we had shared didn't belong to him anymore. It was mine now. Mine to carry. Mine to understand. We didn't speak that day. But as I drove home, I rolled down the window. Let the wind rush in. Let it carry away everything I no longer needed to protect. I wasn't free. Not yet. But I was no longer pretending I didn't want to be. The days leading up to my daughter's birthday carried a strange heaviness, like the sky before a thunderstorm, still unloaded with something waiting to be released. Nothing happened, but everything felt too quiet. I moved through the house as if balancing plates on my shoulders, waiting for one to tip and shatter. Every conversation felt like it might splinter into something more, every silence hung too long, too purposeful. She didn't mention the car again, but the question lived in the spaces between our words. She hovered when I made tea, lingered in the hallway when I answered texts. I felt her watching me, not with malice, but with calculation. It unsettled me more than I admitted. I realized, with some guilt, that I had underestimated her. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was a woman learning how to navigate a world of tension and subtle power, and she was studying me like a mirror, watching what I did with secrets, with silence, with guilt. Meanwhile, my husband had become strangely attentive. Not in a warm, affectionate way, but in presence. He was around more. Home earlier. Less buried in work. He asked about dinners, noticed if I didn't eat, offered to help with chores. It wasn't kindness. It was something else. Something colder. I caught him once staring at me over the top of his reading glasses while I folded laundry. When I looked up, he didn't look away. The message was clear, he was watching too. The note I had found on my car hadn't been followed by anything else, but the weight of it lingered. A warning without a threat. A quiet reminder that my movements weren't invisible, no matter how carefully I traced them. I hadn't told anyone, not my daughter, not him, not the man at the gym. Some truths carry more danger spoken aloud. I cleaned more than usual. There was a sense of finality in how I scrubbed the floors, how I organized closets, how I folded towels into perfect thirds. I wasn't nesting. I wasn't avoiding. I was preparing. For what, I didn't know. But it felt like something was closing, even as nothing had quite opened yet. The night before her birthday, I stayed up late baking a cake. Chocolate, her favorite. I hadn't done it in years, usually we just bought something. But this year, I needed to do something with my hands. Something tangible and deliberate. I found an old playlist on my phone and played it softly, songs from when she was younger, when she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen and I used to believe I was doing a good job. When she came downstairs around midnight, she startled me. I hadn't heard her come down. "You're still up," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Just finishing the cake." She leaned against the counter and looked at it. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. We stood in silence for a moment, the kitchen light soft between us. Then she asked, "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at her, really looked, her hair messy, her face bare, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was afraid of something she couldn't name. "I'm fine," I said. "Are you?" She shrugged. "Just tired." She turned and walked back upstairs without another word. The next morning was unusually warm for the season. Sunlight poured through the windows early, making everything feel too bright, too exposed. I set the table for breakfast. My husband brought flowers, simple, from the supermarket, but arranged carefully. He kissed our daughter's cheek and wished her a happy birthday with a smile that looked like it had been practiced. The three of us sat together, ate quietly, spoke in polite tones. I don't remember what was said. I only remember the feeling that none of us believed each other. In the afternoon, my husband asked to speak with me alone. We stood in the backyard, where the grass had just begun to recover from winter. He looked out over the fence as he spoke, as if he couldn't say what he needed while looking me in the eye. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should do something together. A trip. Just the two of us." I studied him. "Where would we go? Does it matter?" "I suppose not." There was a pause. Then he added, "It might be good. A reset." "A reset," I repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what you think we need?" He finally looked at me. "I don't know what we need." "Then maybe we need to start there." He didn't respond. Just nodded and went back inside. Later that evening, guests began to arrive. Aunts, cousins, family friends. The house filled with voices and laughter and the kind of noise that masks everything beneath it. I smiled when I was supposed to, passed out drinks, made sure everyone had what they needed. My daughter looked radiant. Confident. In control. She floated between conversations, hugged people with practiced grace. But every so often, her eyes would find mine, and something unreadable would pass between us. At one point, I caught my husband talking to one of our guests in the hallway, his hand resting lightly on the man's shoulder, laughing at something that didn't seem particularly funny. I watched him closely. I watched everyone closely. I felt like a stranger at my own gathering, dressed in clothes that didn't quite fit, wearing a smile I couldn't feel. The man from the gym didn't cross my mind until I stepped away from the noise to refill a pitcher of lemonade. As I stood in the kitchen alone, for just a moment, I let myself remember the kiss. Not the act itself, but the quiet before it, the shared awareness, the soft tension, the decision neither of us spoke aloud. Then I heard my husband's voice behind me. "Everything okay?" I turned. He was leaning in the doorway, one hand in his pocket, his expression unreadable. "Just refilling," I said, holding up the pitcher. He nodded. "You've been quiet tonight." "Have I?" "Quieter than usual." I shrugged. "I suppose there's not much left to say." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then, in a voice too calm, he said, "I hope she's having a good night." "She seems happy." "She always was good at seeming." I didn't answer. After a pause, he said, "Let's talk tomorrow." "About the trip?" "About everything." He walked away before I could reply. The rest of the evening passed like a slow unraveling. Cake, gifts, photos. Laughter layered over tension, the way wallpaper covers cracks. Everyone said it was a beautiful evening. Everyone left smiling. By the time I cleaned up and came upstairs, the house was quiet again. I stood in the doorway of my daughter's room for a moment, watching her sleep. Her face was soft in the moonlight, peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. She looked young again. Vulnerable. I wanted to reach out, to smooth the hair from her face, to whisper something that might undo the silence between us. But I didn't. I turned away and went to bed. And for the first time in months, I didn't dream. The morning after her birthday arrived with a gray sky and an odd silence that hung over the house like fog. I woke early, before anyone else, and stood by the window with a cup of tea, watching the clouds drift slowly. The celebration was over, but nothing felt resolved. If anything, the house felt tighter, the walls thinner. As if something had been left unsaid, and all of us were carrying it around in our lungs, afraid to breathe it out. My husband didn't mention our conversation from the night before. He came downstairs, made his coffee, scrolled through his phone, and nodded when he saw me. That was all. No good morning, no how did you sleep, not even a hint of acknowledgement that we had spoken in the kitchen with all the gravity of a couple trying not to unravel. He left for the office with a closed expression, the kind I had become familiar with over the years, the face of a man in control, or at least trying to appear that way. My daughter slept late. When she finally emerged, she looked tired. Not from staying up, but from holding something in. She moved slowly, grabbed a slice of leftover cake from the fridge, and leaned against the counter. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For the party. For the cake. For everything." I nodded. I didn't know what else to say. Her gratitude was genuine, but it felt loaded, as if she, too, understood that what we celebrated last night wasn't just a birthday. It was a threshold, a shift in the ground beneath our feet. She didn't ask about the car again. And I didn't bring it up. By noon, I had packed a small bag and called the gym to confirm a personal session. It wasn't a lie, not exactly, but it wasn't just for exercise. I needed distance. Not escape, just a space where I wasn't being watched by the people who knew me too well, or perhaps not at all. When I arrived, the gym was quiet. Most people didn't come on Sunday afternoons. He was there, already waiting near the back, in the studio room where the light came in from the high windows and the noise from the machines didn't reach. We didn't talk much. He handed me a yoga mat, adjusted the sound system to something low and ambient, and walked me through stretches like it was any other day. His voice was calm, professional. But every so often, our eyes met. Not for long. Just enough. Halfway through, I sat back on my heels and looked up at him. "I don't know why I came," I said. He didn't answer right away. He stood still, watching me with a quiet steadiness that had always unsettled me in its lack of pressure. "You didn't have to know," he said finally. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't even reassurance. Just a simple truth, one I hadn't let myself consider. I stood, slowly, brushing my palms against my thighs. "Let's go," I said. He didn't ask where. We left through the back entrance, took separate cars, and met at a place just outside of town, one of those small roadside lodges people rarely look twice at. The kind that held no expectations. No style. Just a door, a bed, and a window that looked out onto trees that didn't ask questions. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We spent the night together. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something I hadn't been ready to accept before. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about desire. It was about claiming something. A feeling, a version of myself, a moment that was only mine. Lying in that unfamiliar bed, with the hum of the air conditioner and the scent of generic hotel soap lingering in the air, I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. He asked no questions. I gave no answers. It wasn't distance or coldness between us, it was agreement. An understanding that this wasn't a beginning or an end. Just a middle. A pause in a life that had felt like it belonged to everyone but me. In the morning, we didn't linger. We left separately, without promises or plans. I drove with the windows down, letting the cold air bite at my skin. The road was empty, and the sky was the color of wet stone. I didn't take the direct route home. I stopped for gas I didn't need, bought a coffee I didn't drink. Every movement felt precise, controlled, like I was writing a script that no one else could edit. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as I'd left it, shutters drawn, quiet, composed. I stepped inside, and the smell of something baking hit me. My daughter had made cookies. The sweet scent was almost too much. She was sitting at the table, laptop open, headphones in. When she saw me, she pulled one out. "Hey," she said, not accusing, not surprised. "Hi," I replied. She looked at me for a long second, then turned back to her screen. "I left some for you." "Thanks." I stood there a moment longer, then went upstairs, changed, and put the bag away at the back of the closet. Not hiding it, just placing it where no one would stumble across it by accident. Later that evening, my husband came home. He greeted us with the usual tone, kissed my cheek, commented on the smell. He took a cookie, complimented her baking, and poured himself a drink. We ate dinner like any other night. Nothing in our voices betrayed the cracks. Nothing in our movements suggested the weight of things unsaid. We were quiet, polite, rehearsed. But I felt it. The shift. Something had closed in me, and something else had opened. Not a door. A window. I had imagined, at some point, that the weight of secrecy would feel heavier with time. That each lie, each half-truth, each silence would pile upon the last until I couldn't breathe beneath it. But strangely, the opposite happened. The more I allowed myself to deviate from the path I'd spent decades following, the lighter I began to feel. Not in a way that brought peace, not exactly. More like I had finally stopped resisting the gravity of a truth that had been there all along. I was not who I pretended to be. It wasn't liberation. It wasn't transformation. It was reckoning. And reckoning doesn't wait for your permission. 3 days after the night I spent away, I received a message on my phone. An unknown number. No words. Just a photo attachment. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. I already knew what it was before I opened it. The image was blurry but unmistakable. Me, stepping out of the lodge, hair pulled back, coat in hand. Alone, but not untraceable. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply. I simply locked my phone, placed it face down on the table, and stared at the grains in the wood until my eyes burned. I had expected consequences. What I hadn't expected was the calm. That same evening, my husband came home later than usual. Not unusual enough to warrant suspicion, but enough to make me notice. He didn't offer an explanation. Just poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and sat in the armchair like he had rehearsed the motion. I asked how his day was. He said it was fine. He asked if dinner was ready. I said yes. We moved through the script like professionals. Each line, each gesture, perfectly placed. But under the performance was an awareness. His eyes lingered on me longer, his questions had weight behind them, and when I handed him his plate, our fingers touched, and he didn't pull away. After we ate, he stayed at the table while I cleaned. I could feel his gaze on my back as I washed the dishes, dried each one slowly, methodically. When I turned around, he was still sitting there, staring into his glass. "We should talk," he said. I waited. "Not now," he added. "But soon." He stood up, carried his empty glass to the sink, and paused next to me. I didn't look at him, but I could feel the closeness, the heat of his presence. "I know more than you think," he said quietly. And then he left the room. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes open, listening to the subtle creaks of the house, the shifting of pipes, the occasional passing car outside. I thought about the photo. About the message. About the unspoken things between us, growing louder by the hour. By morning, the house felt different. My daughter was already dressed when I came downstairs, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her expression guarded. "I have class," she said without looking at me. "Do you want a ride?" "No. I'm going with a friend." She left quickly, the door clicking shut behind her like punctuation. I stood there for a moment, holding a coffee mug I didn't want, trying to decipher whether her coldness was coincidence or design. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur. I walked through the grocery store and couldn't remember what I needed. I folded towels without noticing which ones were clean. I drove to the park, sat on a bench for an hour, then drove back without getting out of the car. Everything felt poised, as if the air itself was holding its breath. That evening, my husband suggested we eat in the dining room. We almost never did. It was a formality reserved for holidays or guests, and yet he had already set the table, lit the candles, poured the wine. I stood at the threshold for a few seconds before entering, scanning the space like a stage. We sat opposite each other. He served the food. I tasted none of it. After the first few bites, he placed his fork down and looked at me directly. "I've been watching you." I met his gaze. "I know." He nodded, slowly. "There was a time I wouldn't have noticed." "That's on me." The silence stretched. I didn't rush to fill it. "I hired someone," he said. "A private investigator." Still, I said nothing. He was supposed to follow our daughter. I was worried about who she was spending time with. I didn't expect what he found. He took a sip of wine, never breaking eye contact. "I wanted to confront you immediately," he continued. "But I waited. I wanted to understand it first. To understand you." I exhaled, slowly. "Do you?" "I don't know." The air between us felt denser now. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. But there was something hollow in his restraint, something fragile. "You could have asked me," I said. "Would you have told the truth?" I didn't answer. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I don't want drama or spectacle. But I do want honesty. Starting now." He pushed something across the table, a folder. I didn't reach for it. "I didn't look through all of it," he said. "Just enough." I stared at the folder, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. I hated that he had proof. That someone had been close enough to me to capture it without me knowing. But mostly, I hated that I wasn't shocked. This was inevitable. A consequence I had already made peace with. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you." I finally reached for the folder but didn't open it. I set it aside and looked back at him. "I won't justify it," I said. "But I won't lie about it either." He nodded again. "Good." We sat in silence for a long time. The candles burned low. The wine cooled. The food grew cold between us. Eventually, he said, "She doesn't know about any of this." I figured. "She still sees you as the stable one." I let out a soft, bitter laugh. "That's ironic." He didn't smile. "I'd like to keep it that way," he added. "At least for now." I nodded. So would I. We cleaned up together without speaking. The motions were familiar, automatic. As we moved past each other, our hands brushed once. Neither of us pulled away. That night, I sat by the window with a blanket draped over my shoulders, staring out at the backyard, remembering when it used to be filled with laughter and lawn chairs and barbecue smoke. Everything looked smaller now. Even the trees seemed shorter, as if the years had quietly compressed them. I heard footsteps behind me and turned. It was my daughter. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I considered lying. But I was too tired. "We're figuring things out," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She walked away without pressing. And that, somehow, hurt more than any question she could have asked. Because silence, when it comes from someone you love, is not just an absence. It's a boundary. The days that followed blurred together in a quiet monotony that both comforted and unnerved me. We had spoken. The truth was no longer hiding beneath layers of routine. And yet, strangely, nothing had changed on the surface. My husband still kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. I still packed his lunch. Our daughter still moved through the house with earbuds in, her gaze carefully avoiding mine when she passed. But something essential had shifted, like the current beneath still water. There was a tension to everything, a heaviness in how we carried ourselves. We were three people walking through the same house, careful not to disturb anything, as though one wrong step might crack the foundation beneath us. The folder he had given me remained untouched. I left it in my nightstand drawer, beneath a stack of old receipts and half-used notebooks. I didn't need to look through it. I already knew what it contained. My life, pieced together in photos and timelines, curated by a stranger. A version of myself that had been observed from the outside, silent, distant, exposed. I didn't return to the gym. I didn't call him. Whatever existed between us had reached its natural ending, or perhaps its pause. The part of me that once longed for escape had now grown quieter. Not from regret, but from saturation. There was nothing left to run from. I had already arrived at the edge of everything I thought I feared. One morning, I found myself alone in the house for the first time in weeks. My husband had left early for a meeting. My daughter had classes. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight pouring through the windows, and realized how unfamiliar the stillness felt. I used to crave it. Now it unsettled me. I made tea, poured it into my favorite cup, and carried it out to the backyard. The air was crisp, the ground still damp from the rain the night before. I sat on the worn wooden bench beneath the tree we had planted the year our daughter was born. Its branches had grown taller than the roofline now, but the trunk still carried the scar from where she had once carved her initials with a kitchen knife. I traced the scar with my fingers, the bark rough and cool under my skin. That tree had grown silently, without applause, without notice. I envied it. The tea cooled quickly. I didn't drink much of it. My mind kept drifting back to the conversation I hadn't had, with him, with her, with myself. By the time my daughter returned that afternoon, I had almost convinced myself to say something. Not everything. Just enough to break the pattern of avoidance. But she walked in with a group of friends, their laughter loud and careless. She waved at me briefly before disappearing upstairs, her life continuing as though nothing beneath the surface had shifted. I stood in the hallway long after the front door had closed, wondering when I had stopped being part of her inner world. Or if I ever truly was. That evening, I found a photo album buried in the closet. One of the old ones, the kind with plastic sleeves and curling edges. I flipped through it alone at the dining table, each page filled with faces that now seemed like characters in someone else's story. There we were at the beach. At birthdays. At school plays. All of us smiling. All of us pretending, perhaps not consciously, but certainly consistently. There was one photo that caught me, my daughter at age 5, standing beside me with a handmade paper crown on her head. Her eyes wide with pride, her hands sticky from frosting. And me, crouched beside her, mid-laugh, looking not just happy, but present. I hadn't felt present in years. Later that night, after the house had quieted, I stepped into her room. She was lying on her bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, surprised. "Can we talk?" I asked. She hesitated, then set her phone aside. I sat on the edge of her bed, careful to leave space between us. "I know I haven't been easy lately," I began. She said nothing, but her eyes softened slightly. "I'm figuring things out," I continued. About myself. About all of us. She looked down at her lap. Is it about Dad? In part. I saw the folder, she said quietly. In your drawer. My breath caught. I didn't open it, she added quickly. I just saw it there. I guessed what it was. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I don't want details, she said. But I want to know if we're okay. I met her eyes, suddenly aware of how much she still needed me, even if she didn't say it aloud. We're not perfect, I said. But we're still a family. She didn't respond. But after a moment, she leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. We sat that way for a long time, no words, just shared silence. The kind that wasn't avoidance, but understanding. When I left her room, I felt something shift. Not resolved. But softened. The next morning, my husband stood at the stove making eggs. A quiet gesture, unfamiliar and almost clumsy. You don't have to do that, I said, stepping into the kitchen. I wanted to. We moved around each other carefully, but less like strangers now. More like people trying to remember how to be known. Over breakfast, he mentioned a work event that evening. A dinner. Formal. Will you come? He asked. I considered it. Do you want me there? He met my gaze. Yes. And for the first time in a while, I believed him. That night, I dressed with more care than usual. Not to impress, not to provoke, but to feel like myself. I chose a navy dress I hadn't worn in years. Simple, fitted, familiar. When I walked down the stairs, he was waiting at the bottom. His eyes scanned me, not hungrily, but with a kind of nostalgia. You look good, he said. So do you. We drove mostly in silence. But this silence was different. It didn't press on my chest like it used to. It allowed me to breathe. At the dinner, we mingled, smiled, made conversation. We played our parts. But when we sat together at the table, he reached for my hand under the cloth. Just for a moment. And I didn't pull away. When we returned home, I stood by the window again, looking out at the quiet street. I didn't know what came next. But for once, I wasn't afraid of finding out. I woke before sunrise, the house still blanketed in that particular kind of silence that only exists in the earliest hours. It wasn't heavy or tense, it was just still. The kind of stillness that invites you to sit with yourself before the demands of the day interrupt. I lay there for a while, not asleep but not entirely awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional creak of old wood settling beneath time. There was something final about the morning, though nothing had been decided. No declarations had been made, no plans drawn up. But I felt it in my chest, a soft but steady sense that I had reached the end of a chapter. Not in a cinematic way, but in the quiet way real things end, slowly, with space and breath and an understanding that you don't need a storm for closure. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't reach for my phone. Instead, I sat in the corner chair by the bedroom window, knees tucked to my chest, watching as the sky turned from black to navy, then pale blue. This was the light I used to wake up early to paint in, years ago, when I still believed I could make something meaningful out of color. When I still believed I had time. Around 7, I heard the bathroom door open. My husband moved quietly, his steps soft, deliberate. He didn't say anything when he passed the bedroom. He didn't peek in. We had become respectful in our silences. Not withdrawn, but cautious. When I finally came downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of toast. He had left a plate for me. 2 slices, lightly buttered, a mug of tea beside it, nothing grand, but intentional. I stared at it for a long moment before sitting. I ate slowly, watching the shadows shift across the counter, thinking not about what had happened but about what hadn't. My daughter emerged late, her hair still damp from a shower. She offered me a quick smile, brief but genuine, before heading out the door. I didn't ask where she was going. She didn't offer. That, too, had become a kind of truce. At noon, I took a walk. No errands, no headphones, no destination. Just a slow loop through the neighborhood. The trees had begun to shift into autumn, leaves tinged with gold and rust, the sidewalks littered with the early fall. I passed familiar houses, faces I had seen but never truly known. Everyone living their lives, carrying their stories, wrapped in private timelines. No one waved. I didn't mind. By the time I returned, the sun had warmed the porch, and I sat there for a while, hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing. I thought about all the versions of myself I had been in this house. The new wife. The young mother. The woman who held everything together without asking for much. The woman who stopped recognizing herself. The woman who made a choice. The woman who came back. Around 3, I opened the folder. It had sat untouched in the drawer for days, a quiet threat that I had learned to coexist with. But now, with everything already exposed, it had lost its power. I took it out, placed it on the dining table, and opened the cover. Photographs. Notes. Dates. All lined up with meticulous detail. The clinical nature of it struck me, the way my life had been dissected into bullet points and timestamps. No emotion, just facts. Proof, delivered like a diagnosis. I flipped through the pages slowly. A hotel parking lot. The gym. A cafe. Always from a distance. Always just close enough to know. But what I noticed most was how ordinary I looked. Not reckless. Not romantic. Just tired. Distracted. A woman trying to be elsewhere. I closed the folder and pushed it aside. It had served its purpose. There was nothing left in it that could surprise me. When my husband returned home, I was in the living room, reading. He set down his briefcase, hung his coat, and stood at the entrance of the room for a few seconds before stepping inside. I didn't look up immediately. I finished my paragraph, marked the page, and closed the book. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes steady. "I think we need time," he said. I nodded. "I know. Not apart," he added. "Just time. To be honest. With ourselves. With each other." I studied him. The lines around his eyes, the tired set of his shoulders, the way his voice no longer carried accusation, just quiet certainty. "I don't want to hurt each other anymore," he said. "Neither do I." We sat in silence for a while. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tragic. It was just two people looking at the same landscape from different ends, acknowledging the shape of it. "I think I'll stay with my sister for a while," he said. I nodded. "That's okay." "I'm not leaving," he clarified. "I know." He stood. Walked toward the door. Then paused. "Thank you," he said. "For not lying when it mattered." I wanted to say something. To return the gesture. But instead, I just gave a small nod, and he left. The door closed softly behind him. No slam. No echo. I didn't cry. There was no devastation. Only quiet. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Nothing elaborate, just vegetables and rice. I ate slowly, at the table, with the window open. The breeze carried in the faint sound of laughter from down the street, the rustle of leaves in the trees. Life continued. Unbothered. Unapologetic. Later, I went to the closet and pulled out an old canvas. The last one I had started, now covered in a fine layer of dust. I wiped it clean, placed it on the easel, and sat before it with a brush in my hand. No plan. No pressure. Just a white space, waiting. As I painted the first stroke, I didn't think about what had been lost. I thought about what I could still make.